It's time for Talkin Tauntauns, your Star Wars source at AIPTcomics.com.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Talkin Tauntauns. I am Jim Lahane, and with me, as always, is Nicole Herview.
Me, hello.
How are you doing, Nicole?
I'm very excited right now. That's how I'm doing. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Trying to figure out audio issues, which is so much fun.
Yeah, right? My computer just decided to not work. I can no longer record on my laptop because it's officially too old. It won't take an update from Audacity. It won't take a software update. And now it won't re-download the old versions of Audacity. So it's useless for me right now. So I had to figure out
you
my
are
actual
dead
computer.
to me.
I know. No, but I've figured out my big honkin' iMac, and it seems to be working well right now. So
that's good.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see how well this works once we put it into edit mode.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, but we have a special interview today. We have Claudia Gray coming on the episode.
Yeah, you heard that right. We have Claudia Gray coming on this episode. What the fudge, man? What on earth?
So we're super excited to get there. We had one piece of news that we wanted to talk about before we get to the big interview.
Your tauntaun will freeze before you reach the first marker. Then I'll see you in hell.
Hello, what have we here?
Yeah, apparently they have released we knew that we were getting Vision Season 2 this year, but they have released the release date, which is Star Wars Day, May the 4th of this year. And on top of that, we get all of the studios that they announced and all of the episodes and writers or directors of all those episodes. All the episode titles, I mean. And so they gave us a lot of information. I'm really excited to see what they do this year because unlike the first season, which was centered on Japanese companies, these companies come from across the globe. So to give a quick rundown, we have El Guri. I will butcher some of these names, and I apologize. El Guriri from Spain, Cartoon Saloon from Ireland, Punk Robot from Chile. Chile? We'll go with Chile.
Chile.
Aardman from the UK.
We love Aardman. Aardman is great. Aardman does Wallace and Gromit. I love Aardman.
Excellent. We got Studio Mir from South Korea.
Yeah, they did The Legend of Korra.
Oh, I love The Legend of Korra. Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Studio La Cachette from France. 88 Pictures from India. D'Art Châtillon. Châtillon. There we go. D'Art Châtillon from Japan.
You got it.
And Triggerfish from South Africa.
I'm excited. I didn't even fully process Aardman. Until you just said it, and I was like, wait a minute. I know what that is. And especially knowing it's from the UK. I'm like, oh yeah, it's Wallace and freaking Gromit and Shaun the Sheep. And it's just really good stuff. So that's going to be a kind of a cool medium to see tackle Star Wars. You know what I mean? That's going to be really cool.
Yeah, I know they consider these non-canon typically, that they don't have to fit in. But I feel like at least with the first season, most of the shorts fit into canon because you don't want something so outside of canon that it's going to be blatantly obvious that it doesn't fit in here. So I feel like they purposely tried to make the story so it can fit into canon, even though technically it doesn't have to.
Right, it's canon adjacent. It happened, but it happened over there, so you don't need to worry about it. But it happened though, you know, or at least it feels like what could have been, what could have happened. I don't know. It just feels very, like I said, canon adjacent.
Yeah. So I think I'm very excited about that. I think it'll be cool.
That's gonna be dope. I'm happy we're getting another season. It's cool that they're pulling in so many different kinds of studios and from all over the world. I think that is gonna give a lot of life to this season. I mean, I love Vision Season 1, no complaints, all great. but I think it is a natural evolution to be like, let's bring in stuff from all over the world. I think that's awesome.
Let's bring in more global influence. That way you can
Yeah.
see more of the different cultural impacts
Yeah.
and see how how one Star Wars influenced the art and the culture, and how the culture is now going to influence Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested to see what like time periods they tackle and like what kind of storylines we get and like all of that interesting stuff. It's just cool. It's a cool place to be able to tell like a new type of Star Wars story.
Yeah, I can't wait. But I think we can keep the people waiting no longer. And so I think it's time for our interview.
We would be honored if you would join us.
All right. And joining us today is multiple Star Wars author who has released many of the favorite in the new Star Wars canon since Disney has rebooted from Legends. In one of my favorite Star Wars authors, it is Miss Claudia Gray.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I am super sleepy. I had to take my husband to the airport. What seemed really early to me, a person who works at home, what probably was not that early in the grand scheme of things. But I don't know about you guys, but if I'm like, oh, I need to get up at such time, then I'm going to really worry about it if it's not the usual thing. So of course, worried a great deal over nothing. And that was a lot of talk to just say, I'm sleepy, but fine. How are you?
Same.
I'm doing all right. I understand that, though.
It's my own fault. Yeah.
When I set my alarm clock, like say I for some reason need to get up at 4 a.m, and you have to get up at that early. You get up at 1, you get up at 2, you get up at 3, like every hour.
Yeah, especially if an airport's involved, then it's like, okay, high stakes. Like we gotta actually get up. Let's go.
Yeah. And you're always convinced like this will be the day that there's the traffic problem or the car problem. At least I worry about this sort of thing. My husband slept like a rock. So
it happens, right. Whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have some questions for you.
Ask these questions.
Fantastic.
All right. Your first work in the Star Wars universe was 2015's Lost Stars. How did you end up getting involved with Lucasfilm in the first place?
I've been writing my own young adult sci-fi and fantasy for a while at that point. But I mean, I first began writing. I never took, writing courses in college or anything like that, but I wrote a lot of fan fiction. I wrote a ton of fan fiction, literal millions of words. And I never thought that was going to play into my career in any way whatsoever. But there was actually an editor at Lucasfilm who had been keeping a track of my whole career, but that I had met on Alt TV X-Files Creative back in 1995. Now, it wasn't like, oh, I know her, I'm going to get this, but she knew how I wrote. She knew, that I could write quickly. And she also knew how I handled playing in somebody else's sandbox. She had a sense of what that was going to be like. So they reached out to me. I was getting gas. My agent at the time called and said, did you see that email? And I was like, what email? And she said, the email that said Star Wars. Hang on, and we were so naive. We thought that they had mistyped the year of when they wanted it turned in. That's how fast those deadlines are. Like, oh, they can't mean this year. They can't possibly mean that. They did very much mean that. But anyway, I thought, well, they're going to give me this outline and it'll spell everything out, but I'll still do it because Star Wars and this will be fun. And then they really just said, we want childhood friends who wind up on opposite sides of the war in the original trilogy. And we want this angry guy who's going to wind up in the Empire and this idealistic girl for the rebellion. And I said, well, can I have the idealistic girl in the Empire and the angry dude in the rebellion? And they said, okay. And the rest of it, I really got to generate. So, I came up with an outline. They liked it, and I got the job.
If you, I don't know if you wanted to say what fan fiction, what universes were you working other than X-Files, obviously?
It would be quicker to say what I didn't write, honestly, because I wrote heavily for a long time. No Stargate, no Stargate at any time. No Supernatural at any time. Weirdly, Star Wars was never a big fan fiction thing for me, which I'm not really sure why exactly. But sometimes, you write, fanfic writers out there will sort of know the truth of this. Sometimes you write the thing that you're not fully satisfied with because you're like, no, I have to fix this, or I have to add this, or I have to do whatever. And I was pretty happy with my Star Wars experience. But yeah, I wrote it a lot, and I cared about trying to actually make it good and then to make it better. And that was, I used to think, how do people ever write novels? I could not wrap my head around that. I'm like, there's so much. How did you ever? And then I had my first novel length idea and was like, oh, that's what that feels like, which was actually a really big step in terms of my getting ready to write my own fiction. I just had to know kind of like what that feels like. That's when you have an actual story together. I often say one of the things that really trips up aspiring writers and even plenty of writers into their careers is, do you have a premise or a plot? If you think you have a plot and you only have a premise, that can really hurt. But I kind of feel like working with fanfic really taught me, like, no, you've got a plot here. That feels like about 90,000 words.
That's cool.
That's really cool to hear as well, because I'm a writer as well. And the first thing I ever wrote was Lord of the Rings fan fiction, because I was like, there aren't enough women in the story, so I'm going to put one in there. And I put a woman in the Fellowship, and that's the first thing I did. So that's always nice to hear that there's other people who thought that way and then became extremely successful. So that's super cool.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, I kind of miss it, to tell you the truth, but I am kept busy enough writing now. So
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Would you write more fan fiction if you could?
Maybe someday, if there's something that I love enough and yet feel vaguely dissatisfied by. Yeah, I mean, probably, way down the line. I mean, I'm a fangirl. I'm a nerd. That is my fundamental role, and it is still very, very weird for me sometimes to be like, oh, you don't actually get to take part in that space in the same way. I tried to, and up until Star Wars, I could do, but after Star Wars, then it became too much of a thing. Like, I could be like, oh, I didn't like this episode because the people were like, well, you're throwing your weight around or something, where I was like, I thought I was just yapping on Twitter like the idiot that I am, it's a thing. And I was like, oh, I actually have to step back from this. Don't get me wrong, I love what I do. I am so hugely grateful to do it, but I don't get to just be super nerdy in the same way exactly anymore. So, maybe, years down the line, if things have changed, maybe I'll get to come back in and argue vehemently about the new season versus the old season or whatever again.
I fully understand that. You get like once somebody is kind of like, say Ryan Johnson said something, not even negative, but criticized something on TV, all of a sudden it would be like a huge thing on the internet. Like,
it's a headline. Yeah, that's a headline.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that I actually personally quit doing my Twitter, it gets updated now, but by my assistant, but was because I would just be like, wouldn't it be cool if, they did this with Chewbacca or something like that? And somebody would be like, Lucasfilm source reveals Chewbacca. And it's like, no. I'm not a Lucasfilm source. But there's so many websites and YouTube channels and this and that are just desperate for content all the time that they'll seize on things like this. And, it happens one time too many, and you just go, yeah, I can't mouth off about this anymore.
Yeah.
Like it burned me inside not to be able to gush over Andor nonstop while that was running. Because oh my God, how good was that?
I saw that you had posted
excellent.
on Instagram that you're going to do like a Patreon about Andor.
Yeah. I loved that show so much. I mean, just as a show, as Star Wars, and as a person who works creatively with other people's intellectual property, like I almost feel like it is a game changer in terms of the kind of story you can tell with somebody else's intellectual property. Because it was just so astonishingly good. And I've rewatched it several times, and more things become apparent to me each time I watch it. I realize like how layered this is, how subtle some of the little setups and payoffs are. Like one that took me several times to notice. Sorry, now I'm just talking like a fangirl again because
you are.
Like, oh, we love it.
In a way, I have to
Welcome.
do it. The night before, spoilers for Andor listeners.
That came out 4 months ago.
Yeah. The night before the Eye of Aldani, when the next morning Nemec says, I don't understand. I have my faith to sustain me and I can't sleep. You sleep like a stone. Andor slept fine. All right. Then when you see the night before the riot in One Way Out, when everybody breaks out, Andor's lying there awake. He hasn't been asleep. He cares about somebody else besides himself. And that has changed. I was like, that is so beautifully done. It doesn't call any attention to itself, but there it is. And there's a lot of stuff in there like that. But anyway, that was really inspiring. I would have loved to get more about that. I feel like there was a question I was supposed to answer somewhere in there.
No, I don't think so. I think
this is sleep deprivation babbling with Claudia Gray.
No, I
love it. I live for it. No,
that's really like our entire podcast is really we just like to geek out about Star Wars with people.
That's it's great. We get very excited very quickly. But I know Jim does there is a second question in here.
I do. We can go on to our actual second question.
Okay, question 2.
All right. You've worked in time periods across the entire Star Wars timeline, from the High Republic's Into the Dark and Fallen Star, in the prequel trilogy with Master and Apprentice, in the OT with Leia, Princess of Alderaan and Lost Stars, to the sequel trilogy, or just before the sequel trilogy with Bloodline. Is there a time period that you like working in more than the others, or one that you would prefer to work in if you were given the options?
I mean, I enjoy being able to do all of that. It's nice to jump around. I'm interested in different things in all of these time periods and others. I have explained to Lucasfilm Publishing that, if and when, because I personally believe, again, I'm not a Lucasfilm source, but I just personally believe we're going to see something with Knights of the Old Republic again eventually. And I've explained that if anybody else writes the YA novel that is the backstory of Mission and Zalbar, and it is not me, there's going to be blood. Because I want to go back. I want to go back the 10,000 years and dig into those characters. I love that game so much.
That's probably my most favorite Star Wars game, because it came out at the perfect time, and like the twists and turns in it. When I got to the end, I'm like, wait, what? And,
well, sorry about that little ding there, but yeah, I mean, I love the fact that there's all this stuff in there that's just, even, you have to stop and solve a murder mystery at one point. You have to do all these. The side quests are highly varied, but I love the characters so much. I love how differently I get to experience that with each playthrough. My favorite thing to do is never once to take Candaris on a mission. But every single time after I come back, I'm like, Candace, tell me one of your stories. And he has a ton of them. And he'll just tell another story. And then he'll be like, come back when you want something done right. And that's just all I do with him the entire game. It amuses me anyway.
Just keep them on a shelf. It's like, you go do your own things.
Yeah, Candace for the anecdotes. But anyway, so I would like to write in all the time periods. I would not want to be confined.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. And I was gonna ask if there was a sandbox that you haven't, played in yet, or a character that you want to explore. And clearly, Knights of the Old Republic. But is there anything else or anyone else that you haven't written yet that you're like itching to like pull into a story, or dedicate a whole story to?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to write Ray at some point. I'd really. I've actually asked a couple times to write Lando and they never come to me, but I've always loved Lando Calrissian. Even when I was a kid, that was like my favorite action figure, and my brother traded it at recess for like a Hoth Ranger or something.
That's rude.
I still bring it up sometimes.
You remember that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was not his figure to trade. That would be really interesting. I'd love to write Qui-Gon again sometime. I think that would be really enjoyable to do. And I mean, obviously at this point, if there were going to be any writing done around Andor, I would, plead and weep to get a chance to do that. But I don't know that that's going to need anything else. It's so beautifully done. What is her name? I'm blanking out on her name. Who is the mechanic on Tatooine? Amy Sedaris.
Oh, in The Mandalorian?
Yeah.
Something with an M.
Yeah. Oh, I can't remember her name either, but I know exactly who you're talking about. She's lovely.
She would be hilarious and great to write.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. She's definitely one of those characters for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so happy you brought up Qui-Gon, because Master and Apprentice, I've said this a lot on the show, so it's no secret. My favorite Star Wars book, one of my favorite books of all time. So I just have to thank you for that, because it's incredible. I'm also a prequel girly, so like that's part of it. But with that, like that relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan is so ridiculously rich, and there's so much going on, and you added so much to it as well. Is there a part of like the Phantom Menace that when you see it, you go, there they are, that encompasses their relationship, that's it, like that's the vibe that I need to hang on to the whole time? Or does it not work like that?
It's not one moment, but I think it says so much that to an extent, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon don't agree on what to do in a whole lot of the Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
And then there's that final scene that is just so tender and loving, and in some ways it gives the lie to the whole idea of Jedi not forming attachments. It's like, of course a master and a Padawan form an attachment. What the hell? And I mean, both the fact that is sort of this paradox absolutely baked in to the Jedi Order as it's understood in that era, I guess. But yeah, that's sort of the main thing, that they are able to disagree on several points, and yet that bond is 100% there and very vital and very, very real.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Peli Motto is Amy Sedaris'
well
character.
Done. Yeah. That's the power of Google right there. Good job, Jim.
That's
her and her little droids,
for.
and yeah, she won me over forever when the little Jawa was like, talking to her, she's like, no, I'm working on myself right now.
So
good.
I used to date a Jawa. Or it was like,
yeah. The other Jawa was like, do I have a chance? And she's like, not right now. It's about me. I need to find
Love that for her.
Yeah.
So you have several novels set with characters that we know fairly well, having seen them in the movies and across various TV series. Do you have a method for getting into the characters' heads so that they feel authentic?
Ooh. I mean, you go back to the source if you don't feel like you have it there already. with Princess Leia, I'd already done the groundwork by spending my entire life being a Star Wars fan, asking myself, like, what would Princess Leia do? And just had no idea that was actually going to be a useful activity, until pretty late in the game. With the High Republic characters, that was always different because we were creating the canon as we went. And we had to touch base with each other, and things changed from plans because we would all check out each other's outlines and talk each other through things. But sometimes you get in and you're working with something and it develops maybe in a slightly different way than you had imagined. So we would check base with each other, like, do you think it would be like this? Do you think it would be like that? Kevin Scott and I did a lot of talking about where Stellan Gios and Avar Kriss would be sort of at the end of phase 1 of the High Republic. They have one final conversation with each other, and we really had to figure out, like, how does that go? Like, what's going on with each of them? What does each one of them think that this is? Because they're very much not in the same headspace at that point. Spoilers for the High Republic. Sorry, I didn't say that one in time. Other times, with characters you create, I explained before, and most people just read it and know, with Leox Jasi, I knew I wanted a scoundrel character who wasn't just going to be Han Solo warmed over. It's like, okay, what's got some of that energy? And then I thought of Matthew McConaughey sort of back in the naked bongo playing era of Matthew McConaughey in the 90s. And I was like, that's perfect, because I was like, that's great scoundrelly energy, and it is not Han Solo at all. So, so that was just sort of finding somebody in real life that I was like, okay, I can tap into some of that energy, and you take that vein and then you get to build the character from there.
I love how I believe Mark Thompson, who does the audiobooks, does the voice of Matthew McConaughey, like 90s McConaughey, when he's like doing Leox Jasi. And I had heard the story before that it's he was based on it, and like, you can't get it out of your head once he starts going into it. You're like, this is spot on.
I guess we've all somehow internalized the voice of naked bongo playing Matthew McConaughey unawares. It comes to us all.
It's my self-conscience.
Yeah, all of us have that angel on one of our shoulders.
Oh yeah, that's a pillar of just my brain at this point. Yeah, it's in there. It's core memory.
As it should be.
For real. We touched on this a little bit, with the whole fan fiction and everything, but I was really curious while reading The Murder of Mr. Wickham.
Okay.
If writing Star Wars and like kind of playing with these characters that already exist, who we already know, and putting them in different situations, like if that kind of prepped you to write a book like that, but with Jane Austen characters. Do you know what I mean? Like, am I drawing a parallel that's not there? Like, how did that kind of like prep you for writing that book?
Well, no, I mean, those things do to some extent spring out of the same, toolbox. You are working with characters that are established. You want to both embody where they've been, but feel like you're adding something when you tell the story. And luckily, I've also been a rabid Jane Austen fan for years and years. So I had that to work with. Now, in the case of Star Wars is right there going, do this, don't do that. And Jane Austen, not so much. But Jane Austen's fans, who would comprise a really large part of the readership for the book, I knew they would do that for me. And in some ways, one thing that was a little harder was it was Star Wars in the end. If I don't know something, and there's always something that I don't know, it's a very detailed world that's evolving all the time. I can ask. I've actually really been talking about, for Celebration this year, I'm thinking about getting a T-shirt made up in really big letters that says Pablo would know, because everybody who's ever worked on Star Wars has uttered those words at some point. Pablo would know. Pablo Hidalgo, knows everything about this. And I'm just like, every single one of us winds up saying it eventually. Whereas with the Regency era, I was like, oh, well, it's the real world. You can look all of this up. And some of it is actually a little bit elusive. And sometimes historical sources don't agree about who would be driving this kind of carriage. Or you need to know what the rent would be on a fancy place in Bath in the year 1822. How fancy, etc. But that's actually kind of hard to track down. And there is no Pablo, or
Right.
if there is, I'm sure there's probably some historian who knows all of this, but they are not on call to me. And
Yeah,
I
you don't
haven't
have
found
them in your phone. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't found them yet and bribed them with things. But so
Tea. I think they like tea in the breed.
well, I mean, they liked tea back in the day. This person, I don't know what they might want now, but but yeah, so sometimes it's even a little bit harder to get the answers for some details, and you just try to really not need that for your plot if at all possible, but sometimes you do.
Yeah, and it's like even if you can't find it, those like they'll figure it out. Like those like
somebody will know.
It's like
you get
it's
it
not
wrong.
like, oh well. Yeah.
I mean, true story, a fan fiction that I wrote, I mean, at this point, more than 20 years ago. It was set in Egypt in like the year 1958, I think was the year. Part of it was anyway. And for some reason, I know not what, I decided that I wanted these people to be in a real hotel instead of making up a hotel in Cairo like a normal person. And so I do all this research and I find like this hotel, went up in Cairo in the late 1950s. I'm like, well, my odds are pretty good there. And I use that hotel. Somebody emailed, they're like, that hotel didn't open until 1959. I'm like, how did the one person who knows all about hotel construction in Cairo in the 1950s wind up reading this story? Like, now I make up hotels, but
Yeah, right.
But yeah, the person who knows you're wrong will find your mistake. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I am guilty of doing that. As a paleontologist, I read a friend's book he wrote kind of about dinosaurs. Well, actually,
You weren't on tap already?
Yeah, well, that's I'm surprised I wasn't. And he's like, I should have asked you. I'm like, you're right, you should have asked me. Like, I would easily give up the answer. Like,
yeah, when I wrote my Firebird series, which is about cross-dimensional travel, one of the universes that the heroine goes to is set in Russia. And another is on a deep oceanography station. And it's really great in that situation to have a good friend who's a Russian oceanographer. And I do.
Yeah.
Her name is Marina, wonderfully enough. But she'd be like, okay, I need some words like for endearments in Russia. And I also need to know about how storm currents are perceived at what depths. And I get these long emails back like, okay, thank you, Marina.
Yeah.
it's great to have good sources.
Yes.
They really don't tell you how much research goes into being a writer. And the joke is obviously like, if the FBI got my search history, I'd be in trouble. It's bad. It's wild that I feel like 90% of it is research and 10% is actually sitting down and writing the thing. Mm-hmm. But it's just wild. So wild.
Yeah. Yeah. If only every subject had Pablo.
Yeah. We all need a Pablo.
I feel like along with your shirt, you could have the placards at Celebration that says Claudia Gray, not a Lucasfilm source. Right underneath it.
I'm not a Lucasfilm source. I could get one like that. That would also be a good one to have. Yes, you're right. Good idea.
That's funny.
All right, so tell me about the High Republic Writers Room. It seems like an absolutely wonderful experience and a lovely group to work with. We've had Daniel Jose Older and Justina Ireland on the show, and they both are absolutely fantastic people. I love talking to both of them. So, how was that experience as a whole?
That has been great, and that has actually been my favorite part of the High Republic. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm really, really glad that we've written these books and that people are responding to them, but the fact that we all really made friends during that experience, and that extends to more than the High Republic now. When I'm considering, doing graphic novels, to be able to turn to somebody like Charles Soule, that is a real privilege. When I was agent shopping a couple of years ago, it was Justina who sort of pointed me in the direction of my current agent. It's work where you're not with your coworkers a whole lot, and actually have coworkers to be able to talk about, oh, okay, we're doing it like this. Is that a strange thing to do? What results have you gotten with this kind of promotion or that? I know that may not be exactly where you're going with that question, but it has really been great to make friends. And, we got to kick it off in high style at Skywalker Ranch, which was awesome. But, a lot of it now is just us on the Slack going, look at this Yoda nutcracker I found. Whatever.
So your Slack is exactly like our Slack. It's just
like ours,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I've been reading the Star Wars books for almost 30 years at this point, and almost every Star Wars author that I've met has been absolutely like a wonderful person. Like you rarely get the bad eggs. I think Lucasfilm does a fantastic job of pre-screening and everything, and if they are a bad egg, I don't think they last very long in the process. So it's every Star Wars author I have had wonderful interactions with. So
I've had really great experiences with people too. I think probably if you can't play well with others, you don't get very far in doing that. But I will say, to bring it also yet again back to the fanfic thing, one time on a fanfiction exchange, before either of us wrote Star Wars, a fanfic gift exchange, if you're unfamiliar with it, is you throw blurbs out there and it gets matched up by an algorithm. And so you have a fanfiction written for you by some person you didn't know, and you get a fanfiction, whatever. Anyway, I matched with E.K. Johnston before either of us were Star Wars writers.
That's hilarious.
Yes.
That's really cool.
Yes.
I love her novels as well. The Padme series is some of the funnest books out there.
Oh yes, absolutely. But yeah, we have good times. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in April.
Sorry that I'm not traveling across the pond.
Yeah, I'll be in London like 2 weeks after that. I was like, I'm gonna wait. I love that, but I'm going for work, and anyway, I won't be there, and I'm very sad about it. But that'll be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming at this point they still haven't absolutely confirmed that we're going, but I think it's much likelier than not. So
yeah, I would imagine as much. But yeah, to kind of back up and talk a little bit more, not about a specific work, but I'm always interested in a writer's process. Whether you outline, whether you write everything in order, or you just this scene is really alive to me right now and I got to get it out, even though it's the end of the book. How kind of do you approach something? Like you were saying, writing a novel is intimidating as anything. And I would assume with Star Wars, they need an outline. But if you're writing something that's not, excuse me, for a property that already exists, kind of how do you approach that, and how do you do the two things differently?
I am still an outliner regardless of what I'm doing. I don't consider outlining to be something that is separate from the writing process. It is the writing process. It's more just me working out the bigger beats and the main things about the world before I start getting in and tinkering with well, that's a chapter and that's a scene, before, and that comes before I get in and actually work out the prose and the dialogue, at least the majority of it. Different people do it in different ways, and the only one you shouldn't trust is anybody who tells you there's only one right way. Whatever helps any particular writer get words on the page regularly and make progress on their projects that works great. Do it. For me, I need to know where I'm going. I need to feel like, okay, yes, I'm doing this for a reason. And it's really interesting. Actually, last weekend I was talking with another mystery writer at American Library Association conference, and she is a pantser, no outlines, just dives in. But it was interesting because she was like, well, usually around the X mark, about, somewhere between 12 and 20,000 words is when she figures out like, yes, I've got a book here. This is really going to work. My outlines, once they've gotten to the point that side material and other things that I do, once I realize like, okay, yeah, here we are. It's also about that many words. So I don't know, maybe even though we go about it in different ways, there's that's sort of the quorum amount that you need to be like, okay, all right, we definitely have a book here. So so I'm always outlining. I used to be like, oh, I need to have this music playing or this going. And at this point in my career, like you can almost have me in the overhead compartment of the plane and I can type. I can do it. But I get to write full time, which is a huge privilege that I am tremendously grateful for. I do have an office at home that I like to tuck up into, and my little dog lies down on the back of the sofa and looks out the window so that she can be angry that other dogs exist every once in a while. And I actually have a treadmill in there, and while I can't really write on the treadmill, I can edit. So sometimes I do edits on that. I also have a standing desk if I want to do that. I found that there's no one position that is better for my back than changing position every couple hours is. And that is one of the only physical things involved in being a writer is, your back and potentially carpal tunnel. Other than that, you ought to be good, but you got to watch those two things. I guess I get the majority of my work done in the afternoons. I am not a great morning person, never have been, probably not gonna be. I get up, but I do the things first because there's so much stuff to do with writing that isn't writing. That so I had way more time to write before I became a writer somehow. But it's like, oh, we need back of book copy for this. The outline is due for that. Oh, look over the art for these graphic novel pages. Check on the travel plans for this event that you're going to go do at whatever time. Like I try to take care of as much of that kind of stuff in the mornings as I can. And then I'll work in the afternoons until the early evening. Generally, I try to cut at the evenings just because it's better to give yourself some rest and interact with the other people in your home. And you come back fresher and you do better, but every once in a while when deadlines emerge, I may, have to go squirrel myself back in my office for another few hours of the evening.
Sure.
Is your husband a morning person if you're a night person?
More than I am, but not to some degree where, like, God forbid he would be getting up at 5 a.m. on a non-airport day. None of that. We wouldn't have gotten this far.
Yeah, right.
My wife are so opposite. We almost meet. I'll go to bed at midnight. She wakes up at 4:30.
Oh,
honey, I don't know how you do that, but God bless. My goodness gracious. I was thinking specifically about Lost Stars. Because who isn't always thinking about Lost Stars? But there's a version of it that's a novel and a version that's like graphic novel manga. What's kind of the difference? How do you approach those two mediums differently? Aside from of course, thinking about the art in detail, but do you see them as different, approaches, or kind of what is the difference if there is any,
Well, I had zero involvement with the manga except for them telling me hey, there's going to be a manga.
There's one. Yeah.
Great. I will say, I did my first graphic novels for DC, the House of L trilogy, the final volume of which I believe is out on Tuesday. And it was a big learning experience, and I knew that it would be, but I attended the classes and I read the books, but it is one thing to know you will tell the story through the images. And it is another thing for your creative imagination to begin working in that way. I mean, it's a little bit like when you're learning a foreign language, you can sit there and look at it on the page, but it's going to be a little bit longer before you can actually say a sentence that means what you want it to mean and have it naturally come out of you that way. And so it was very different. And if I'd been either adapting Lost Stars for manga, or if I'd been thinking about it, like if it had been commissioned as a graphic novel to begin with, it would have involved some things that were fundamentally very different. That said, Star Wars in particular, I always, when I'm writing, try to think of it in cinematic ways because, it's a cinematic universe first. And one of the ways you create the feeling of Star Wars is through some of the scene setting, et cetera, that is going to make people envision this stuff that they would have seen in a movie or in a television show. I even try, not all the time, but at least once or twice in a book, I try to have sort of an opening of a scene or a sequence that involves some vehicle going across, a spacescape or a landscape or something, like the swipe, that's the swipe shot that you'd have, something like that. I have no idea whether that actually affects readers the way that I hope that it does, but that's sort of my hope, is that it's going to start conjuring these images that remind you of Star Wars and get you in the mood for that.
So yeah, on a side note, like Lost Stars is like one of my favorite Star Wars books in general. And I feel like I always, when somebody asks about like, I want to read a Star Wars book, what can I do? Lost Stars is like the perfect book because you don't need to know anything other than the original trilogy. And you can just kind of go in. It's Romeo and Juliet into the Star Wars universe. And like by the time you're graduating high school, almost everybody's read Romeo and Juliet, at least in America they have.
Yeah.
And I find it kind of like a perfect entry point for the Star Wars literature.
Yeah, that book has really it's maintained a presence. People still talk to me about it a lot, which is amazing to me because I mean it's 8 years old now, which is crazy to think about. I've always been really grateful for the fact that even though I too have been reading Star Wars books for more than 30 years, actually, I was at Walden Books to buy the Tim Zahn trilogy new, at the mall back in the day. But I did not understand how many people read Star Wars books. I just didn't get it. I didn't fully get it. And so I wrote that first one with just no sense that I had to please anyone but myself. I was just like, this is
sometimes
so
that's
fun.
The best way.
Yeah, it was great. And, I mean, the readers are fantastic and I've had a really wonderful experience. And it's not like, oh, everything was so harsh or whatever with later books, but you can't recapture that exact carefree quality again. It was a really, really enjoyable experience working on that, getting to do that.
I
Which
know
is
that's
good because that deadline was tight.
I know that's one of those that people they want a sequel to. Or at least see those characters kind of what happens to them after the end of at the end of the book.
I mean, I've thought about it, from your lips to Lucasfilm's ears, one would hope, but maybe someday, maybe I feel like eventually it would happen, but it has to line up with something they'd want to do because like when I first was writing for them right after Lost Stars, they're like, what else do you want to do? One of the very first things I said was like, I want to write Qui-Gon. And they're like, really? And I was like, yes, really. And they kept on not having me write Qui-Gon. And I was like, what is this? What is this wrongness? And then the anniversary of the Phantom Menace rolled around. And it's like, oh, of course, that was when I was going to get to write Qui-Gon.
That's what I was thinking. I'm like putting in a timeline. I'm like, wait, Master and Apprentice wasn't right after Lost Stars.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, they actually came to me with Bloodline very, very shortly after, and I was so busy. I remember they were just like, we were wanting you to work on something else for the summer, and I was like, I can't do it. I physically can't do it. And they're like, it's Princess Leia. Damn it. Damn it. You got me.
Yeah. That's how
All right.
that's how you hook Claudia Gray, and we all know now. It's Leia.
Yes.
All right. Last and not least, Geode. I'd be
Geode.
remiss if I did not mention Geode. Anybody who listens to the show knows that rocks are my friends.
Geode is everyone's friend.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So as a geologist, he's obviously my favorite character, but he's also very cleverly written. I love the way he's written. Everybody talks around him as if they're interacting with him, but he never interacts back. We never see him move. He does move, but we never see him move. And he, like, everyone knows what he's saying. And so is there a special process that you go through with working with such a character as Geode that's different than the other characters?
Not the overall process. I mean, clearly he's a comic character. He's not perceived as such, he's serious within universe, but I mean, the trick of it is, and it's the sort of thing that I'm not sure would work in a purely visual medium, because the humor of it comes from the fact that there are so many tropes and cliches and phrases, etc., that do, indirectly show how somebody is reacting or responding, or we all use them all the time. I got to speak with the French translator for the High Republic books, and she was talking about how fun and how challenging it was, because she can't just literally translate it. She has to find the phrases in French that people use, to have the same effect. So, it's playing with that, and there's so much more of that. At the beginning I was like, how much of this will I even be able to do? But there's so much of it. There's so many very conventional workarounds that we have, either that we're used to seeing in prose, or that we say when we're not going to quote somebody directly, or whatever, that you get to employ with the Geode, so that he gets to be fully engaged with the emotional life of all the characters and everything that's going on, while you never see him move and you never hear him speak.
That's it. I think you have enough of the other characters who are, quote, in on the joke, that it works. And then you also have the characters who are not on the joke. And then you'll see some of them slowly kind of move over to in the joke. They're like, wait a second.
Yeah.
I think I understand this now.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that I liked in Into the Dark, because first Reith is just like, is this a joke? This is a rock. This is a rock. But at the very end, which, things have happened, but also Reith has, he has a huge character arc in that book of becoming more mature and taking on more responsibility and dealing with grief and whatever. And his recognition of Geode at the end, it's also a sign, Reith has evolved within the Force. He's able to understand the energy of this living being in a way that he was not able to before.
I think that's all I got. We don't want to take too much of your time.
Of course, ask what you got coming up. If there's anything you want to talk about, we did see that you were talking about a Haunted Mansion book online, and I don't know if you saw, but I'm obsessed. I'm very excited about that. I've got a Haunted Mansion wall back here, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about that, and also what else you would want to talk about that's coming up down the pipeline for you.
Yeah, I don't actually have a Star Wars book this year. A comic, Quest of the Jedi, for Phase 2 of the High Republic, mostly because, as much as I've enjoyed the High Republic, it is time consuming. And after Phase 1, I was like, I got to take a short break from this. Like, there are other things that I need to do. And luckily they were very happy about that. I will be back to write a novel for Phase 3. So,
luckily the schedule kind of works with that is that the
Yeah, it
phase 2
does.
is so far offset from phase 1 that you can do that.
Yeah, it's a natural kind of stepping out and stepping in point. So I got lucky there. Well, like I said, Tuesday, the final book in the House of L graphic novel trilogy comes out, The Treacherous Hope. Then in May, and I cannot remember the exact date anymore, my second mystery novel set in the Jane Austen world comes out, called The Late Mrs. Willoughby, the sequel to The Murder of Mr. Wickham. And then in September, we do have the Haunted Mansion YA novel, which is called Storm and Shade. It's set in New Orleans, where I live. Somehow, even though I've lived here off and on for 20 years altogether, this is the first thing I've written set in New Orleans. So I'm excited to do that. And I'm talking about it a lot because I'm not sure what else I'm allowed to tell you. But it did let me correct a couple of things, because like one of the middle grade books about the Haunted Mansion that was in New Orleans, they had something where it was like, oh, and they found it in a hilly part of town. And it was like, I was like,
where?
This is a river basin, people. Remember, we all know, unfortunately, you pour water on it, it's a bowl. It's about There's no hilly area of town. None of those.
Yeah.
So it was fun to get to write a story that actually had some local flavor.
Yeah,
So-
I'm really excited about that. That's awesome. I'm also patiently waiting for a Haunted Mansion book set in the Disney World mansion, which is in the Liberty Square.
That's a
in
New
New Orleans
England
Square.
one, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm like, I'll just patiently wait for that. But listen, it's the original. It's a classic. I love New Orleans Square, like all of that.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
and
in
it's
terms
great
of the
because
park,
I think I can say this because it's just obvious. Unlike Star Wars with the Haunted Mansion, they don't want there to ever be one canon.
right.
You're not supposed to have all your questions answered about the Haunted Mansion.
Yeah.
There are different versions at different parks. There are supposed to be different stories and different legends. Instead of having to hew to exactly one Bible, you just, I got to go on the ride and just soak it up and be like, what's interesting in that ride? Use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that ride because it truly feels like if you were to like get out of the dune buggy and open a door, there's a full hallway down there that no one has ever seen and no one will ever see again. And there's a story there. Like that's what's so fascinating about that ride. And it definitely lends itself to like a bunch of different books talking about a bunch of different things that maybe all contradict each other. Anyway, I could talk about that for a long time, but it's very exciting.
Would make sure that the stories contradicted each other.
Exactly.
They do that on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah,
the late Mrs. Willoughby is May 16th.
Thank you,
Jim, master of Google. We love that.
Amazon. Amazon knows
That's
all.
Available for pre-order now.
We love it. That's awesome.
All right. Is there anything else where people can follow you?
Social media is all kind of twisty bendy right now, isn't it? I have my website, which is badly in need of updating, but you can follow my social media there. The only ones I really keep up myself are Instagram and Tumblr, for the 12 of us still on that, which is super fun. But it's the best one because nobody can figure out how to make money on it.
Yeah,
so you just get to be a dork undisturbed, which I love. I have a quarterly newsletter that you can sign up for absolutely free. I have a Patreon with right now a very select membership. So, but those, even if you just follow Twitter, Sarah will keep that posted with where I'm going to be, when my releases are, stuff like that.
Wonderful.
All right.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
So much
really fun.
And with that, you can find us on Twitter at Talkin Tauntauns. You could email us, talkintauntauns@aiptcomics.com. You can join our Patreon through AIPT Comics and join us on Discord. You can leave us a 5-star review or review anywhere that fine podcasts are delivered to you whenever. And with that, we're actually taking a break off next week for personal stuff, so we will see you again in 2 weeks.